Today, we're doing a deep dive into one of history's well, most fascinating and chilling juxtapositions, Chicago in the 1890s.
hmm
This was a city just bursting with smoke, ambition, and this dizzying, shocking growth. And it's a place where you have this utopian architectural vision, the White City, rising up at the exact same time as a monument to pure human depravity.
That's right. The secret lair of H.H. Holmes. It
Exactly.
really is the ultimate dual narrative, and it's so hard to reconcile. On one hand, you've got the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition.
Yeah.
It's this beacon of progress, right? A temporary, blindingly white classical city built from nothing, from marshland.
And on the other hand,
The other hand is the reality of the Black City, the gritty, industrial, dangerous metropolis that produced one of America's very first and most complex serial killers.
and that is our mission for this deep dive. We're going to unpack the source material that details the monumental, soul-crushing struggle of the chief architect, Daniel Burnham, to build this impossible dream.
While at the same time, we're tracing the horrifying hidden life of Holmes and his castle.
It's architectural triumph meeting psychological horror head-on, a study in extremes. So let's start with how a raw, ambition-driven city like Chicago even convinced the world it could build paradise. Okay, let's get into it.
The whole impulse for this thing, the initial spark, was just pure national ego.
Right.
It was 1889, and Paris had just hosted its Exposition Universelle, and they unveiled this revolutionary 1,000-foot iron tower, the Eiffel Tower.
And that was seen as a direct challenge, wasn't it?
Oh, a huge one. Americans saw it as France basically declaring it had surpassed the United States, not just in art, but in industry, in steel,
Yeah.
in everything.
So America couldn't be second best. They had to out Eiffel, and they had to do it fast.
They did. But the choice of Chicago to host it was arguably even more contentious. It was driven by this deep local insecurity.
Because Chicago was fighting for its legitimacy. It wanted to shed this reputation it had as a secondary city.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The city that, as the Eastern critics love to say, preferred butchered hogs to Beethoven.
That's such a great line.
It is. And the city had this almost manic energy. You have to remember, the Great Fire of 1871 wasn't that long ago. Chicago had rebuilt itself with this furious competitive spirit.
It's a Chicago spirit.
That's what the sources call it, this palpable, almost violent force. And the fair was its ultimate chance to command respect, to finally eclipse New York.
And that desire, it really manifested in this incredibly dramatic fight for the bid in Congress. The sources paint this picture of a total pressure cooker, both in Washington and back home in Chicago.
Oh, yeah. The scene outside the Chicago Tribune office in February 1890 was the focal point for all that anxiety. People just packed the streets, waiting for the tally from Congress.
And the first ballot was a huge win for Chicago.
Massive. 115 votes to New York's 72, but that still left them 38 votes short of the majority they needed.
And this is where the politics gets really interesting, because that maneuvering in Washington translates directly to tension on the street.
Absolutely. The New York side, led by this charismatic speaker, Chauncey Depew, they sensed the momentum shifting, so they immediately called for a recess, a stalling tactic.
Yeah, and the crowd in Chicago knew it.
Instantly. The sources say all the horse-drawn cabs just stopped. The heavy clanging grip cars, the old cable cars, they were paralyzed in the street. A total profound stillness just fell over thousands of people.
Wow.
And then when the victory finally came on the 7th ballot, that stillness it shattered. The descriptions are of an explosion of joy, shouts that tore through the city like a flash flood.
And there's that one amazing anecdote.
The man with the long beard, who'd sworn not to shave until Chicago won, he let out this shriek of ecstasy that someone said was likened to the scream of a skyrocket. It was just this pure, immediate euphoria. They'd won. But now they had to build it.
And the two men leading that effort were the principals of the most important architectural firm in the city, Daniel Burnham and John Wellborn Root.
And they really embodied Chicago's dual nature, its drive and its cultural ambition.
So tell us about Burnham.
Burnham, he's 43, he's the visionary, the operator. Big guy, impressive, piercing blue eyes. He loved opulence. He'd only travel in the fanciest Pullman Palace cars, insisted on giant fireplaces in his office.
He sounds like a showman.
He was. A contemporary critic, Louis Sullivan, he really pugged Burnham's motivation. He said Burnham was focused on the feudal idea of power and was basically a colossal merchandiser. He was the salesman of the dream.
But the firm's artistic soul, its technical genius, that was John Wellborn Root.
Completely. Root was Burnham's quiet, witty, younger counterpoint. He was a true prodigy, not just in design. He was musical, could talk philosophy, science, even wrote opera reviews.
But his personal life was marked by this profound tragedy early on.
It really was. He married a woman named Mary Walker, the daughter of a stockyards president, but she was already severely ill with tuberculosis when they got married.
The sources make this sound so incredibly bleak.
Harriet Monroe, who would become Ruth's sister-in-law, she was there. She described the ceremony as weirdly sad. She said the bride looked like a white ghost, and her forced happiness seemed like jewels on a skull.
That's a haunting image.
And Mary died within 6 weeks. So you have this image of Ruth having married a dead woman. This incredibly vital, creative man just had this shadow of loss hanging over him.
And yet professionally, their partnership was one of the most innovative of the time. They were pioneers of tall structures.
Right. They capitalized on William Jenney's new load-bearing metal frame, and their work led to the first building ever to be called a skyscraper, the 10-story Montauk.
And this is where Root's technical genius was just absolutely essential, because Chicago's geography, it's a disaster for big buildings, right? It's all marshy fill on top of soft clay.
Yeah, exactly. If you tried to build a normal foundation, like the stone pyramids they'd use, the base would have to be so wide it would fill the entire basement. A Giza of masonry, as one source put it.
So what was Root's solution?
It was pure genius, the floating foundation. He realized they had to dig down to the hard pan clay, this dense, firm layer deep down. That was the only stable base.
On top of that,
On the hard pan, they spread a thick pad of concrete. And then, this is the critical part, they laid a grillage, like a crisscrossing grid of steel rails, and filled it all with cement.
so it's like a giant rigid raft.
Precisely. It distributed the building's immense weight evenly over the largest possible area of that firm clay. It allowed them to build higher than anyone thought possible without the buildings just sinking into the muck. That synergy, Burnham's huge vision and Root's elegant engineering, that was the real foundation of the White City.
So while Burnham and Root are dreaming up this ideal city for the new race of cliff dwellers, the city itself, it's a raw, chaotic, and incredibly dangerous place.
Yeah, we have to understand the reality of the Black City to get the backdrop for H.H. Holmes.
And that reality was just anonymity in industry.
Anonymity, industry, and constant danger. The sheer volume of traffic was a deadly threat. You had 1,000 trains entering or leaving Chicago every single day.
1,000?
And almost all of them were running at grade level, right across streets with pedestrians.
Yeah.
The sources confirm an average of 2 deaths a day just at rail crossings.
2 deaths a day.
Just from that. It wasn't a question of if you'd encounter danger, it was when. The local papers even used the term roasted with this disturbing frequency when they were talking about fire deaths.
But it wasn't just industrial accidents. The violence was... it was stunning.
It was. In the first 6 months of 1892 alone, Chicago recorded nearly 800 violent deaths.
That's 4 a day.
4 people every single day. The rapid, chaotic growth had created this perfect environment for exploitation. It was anonymous.
And that created this extreme vulnerability, especially for single young women who were flocking to the city for work.
Right, Jane Addams, the social reformer, was one of the first to really analyze this. She wrote that never before in civilization have such numbers of young girls been suddenly released from the protection of the home. They were coming for these new jobs, typewriters, seamstresses, stenographers, that just didn't exist a generation earlier.
And predators recognized this influx of vulnerable people almost immediately.
Oh, absolutely. The city's bankers and citizens were so worried that warnings were routinely published in the newspapers, explicitly telling young women not to answer suspicious help-wanted ads.
Especially if the ad was too specific, right? Like seeking of blonde is good-looking is quite alone in the city.
Exactly. The very ambition of the fair, the thing drawing people in, was also increasing the pool of potential victims. And this is the environment that welcomes a man we know as H.H. Holmes, born Herman Webster Mudgett.
He was a master of exploiting that chaos.
He was, and his profile is so fascinating because he wasn't some, hulking monster. He was deceptively ordinary. 5'8", 155 pounds, dark hair.
But the eyes. Everyone mentioned the eyes.
The striking blue eyes. Contemporaries described his gaze as being like a mesmerist.
Yeah.
Someone who could hypnotize you.
And there's that other almost unbelievable detail about his ear.
Yeah, from a physician, John Capon, who observed him closely. He was struck by Holmes's marvelously small ear, shaped and carved after the fashion in which old sculptors indicated deviltry and vice in their statues of satyrs.
It's like this chilling, mythological sign of his inner corruption.
It is. And what's fascinating about his background is the medical training. He studied anatomy, dissection. but not to heal. He developed this cold, calculated understanding of mortality very early on.
He was convinced that there was no reliable way to identify dismembered or burned corpses.
Right, and that knowledge became the basis for his early insurance scams. He even confessed later that when he handled corpses, whether for fraud or murder, they were just material. No different to him than lumber or firewood.
That sheer lack of empathy is the hallmark. I mean, today we'd call him a psychopath, using the Cleckley profile.
For sure. But back then, they just saw him as this chilling anomaly, someone who could project warmth while acting with this profound, terrifying detachment.
And his choice of location was strategic, too. He settles in the suburb of Inglewood.
Yeah, Inglewood was booming after the fire. It offered growth and anonymity, and crucially, it was located upwind of the stockyards.
So he was close to the rising wealth of the city, but far enough from the immediate stench and chaos.
Exactly. He bought a drugstore at a busy intersection, 63rd and Wallace. It let him operate as this charming, respectable businessman selling his tonics and lotions, all while he was laying the groundwork for his real, terrifying enterprise, which was about to capitalize directly on the arrival of the White City. ###33. The battle for the fairgrounds and the death of Root.
Okay, so let's turn back to the dream, the White City. Chicago has the bid. They've chosen Jackson Park, which is located due east of Holmes's new building. But that moment of triumph just evaporates.
It does. It's replaced by the impossible deadline, May 1st, 1893. They've only got 26 months to turn a flat, marshy piece of land into a world-class exposition.
And the delays started immediately.
Right away, the site was a swamp. It needed massive drainage work. And in February 1891, the first workers they bring in, Italian immigrants, are almost instantly driven off by 500 Union men.
So labor disputes from day one.
Constant. The unions were demanding an 8-hour day, union wages. It was a constant thorn in Burnham's side, just eating away at the schedule.
And on top of all that, they had to work under the genius of Frederick Law Olmsted,
the master planner of Central Park. And he was uncompromising. He had very strong opinions about Chicago. He believed its only redeeming feature was Lake Michigan.
He thought everything else was just flat and monotonous.
He did. And he brought this almost spiritual, totalizing vision to Jackson Park. He was focused on creating an aura of mysterious poetic effect through natural landscaping.
He even banned gorgeous, garish, or gaudy flower displays, right?
Yes. He wanted subtle touches that complemented the architecture, not overwhelmed it.
And he had this famous obsession with the boats.
Oh, the boats. He viewed landscaping as anything that grew, flew, floated, or otherwise entered the scenery. So he insisted, absolutely insisted, that the lagoons and canals only use electric launches.
Which he called becoming boats.
Becoming boats.
Yeah.
He totally rejected any steam-powered tugs, the smoke, the noise, the utilitarian look. He thought it would destroy the serene, poetic atmosphere he was trying to create. It just shows his level of control. Even under this insane time pressure, the aesthetic was everything.
So the architects, the big names from the East Coast like Richard Morris Hunt and Charles McKim, they arrive in Chicago and they're not impressed.
Not at all. The sources say they were listless and hopeless. They saw the flat ground, the mud, the impossible timeline, and they just doubted anything great could happen.
And Burnham had to rally them.
He used everything he had: flattery, force of will, patriotism. He told them, 1893 will be the third great date in our country's history. I ask you to serve again.
And to meet that deadline, they had to make a huge compromise.
A grand and very controversial one. They all agreed to clad their colossal buildings in a material called staff.
So it wasn't stone.
Not at all. It was a mixture of plaster, cement, and jute fiber, all spread over wooden frames. It gave the illusion of marble, of permanence, but it was cheap and temporary. And to unify the whole court of honor, they made the decision to paint everything perfectly white.
And that's where the name comes from, the White City.
That's it. And it was functional, fast, and cheap. But aesthetically, it became this source of intense debate. Louis Sullivan, the champion of American design, he hated it. He thought it set American architecture back decades by imitating European styles with cheap materials.
He saw it as a fake, a retreat from real innovation.
Exactly. But Burnham was way past philosophy at that point. He was consumed by the clock. He had a sign over his desk with just one word on it, R-U-S-H.
And that brutal pace, combined with the Chicago winter, it cost him his partner.
It did. Root was essential, not just as a designer, but as his calming influence on the egos of the Eastern architects. And in January 1891, after seeing them off coatless in the bitter cold, he caught a severe cold.
It turned to pneumonia.
Very quickly. and his death was so sudden and so poignant. A relative recalled that in his final moments, he was running his fingers over his bedding like he was playing music, whispering, "Do you hear that? Isn't it wonderful?" That's what I call music.
The artist, to the very end.
Yeah, but the sources also give us Burnham's private reaction, which is just gut-wrenching. It was overheard from the stairwell outside his office. He wasn't mourning the man so much as the jeopardized dream.
What did he say?
He just said, "I have worked to make us the greatest architects in the world. I have made him see it and kept him at it, and now he dies. Damn, damn, damn."
Burnham was now completely alone, having lost his other half, trying to deliver this impossible city.
So as the White City is rising as this vision of plaster and idealism, Holmes is building his own monument in Inglewood, the so-called World's Fair Hotel. Right, and it was designed specifically to exploit and consume the wave of vulnerable people the fair was drawing in. He acted as his own contractor, which was key.
Why was that so important?
Because he used systematic fraud and secrecy. His whole construction strategy was an exercise in ensuring no one knew the full picture.
The hire and fire method.
Exactly. He'd hire workers that immediately fire them, often yelling at them for shoddy work and refusing to pay. By doing that, he made sure no single person except him understood the building's internal, terrifying secrets. The staircases to nowhere, the windowless rooms, the airtight closets.
It was a custom-built killing factory.
Horrifyingly so. It was built over this massive basement cavern. And on the upper floors, he had specialized features like a large, walk-in, soundproof vault.
This wasn't just a safe for valuables.
No, this was an airtight steel-lined chamber. And the sources confirm he actually tested it. He casually asked a jeweler, Ned Connor, to step inside.
What did Connor report?
That once the door was closed, he could only hear a faint sound from the outside. Holmes was apparently delighted. He had a perfect space for suffocation.
And the centerpiece of this whole machine was in the basement.
The kiln. A specialized iron-reinforced kiln. He hired a bricklayer to build it, claiming it was for bending plate glass. But the furnace manager who installed the burner, he noted its strange shape, seemed unsuited to the task of bending glass.
Because it was designed for something far more sinister.
It had an inner chamber and openings designed to funnel burning gases back into the flame, allowing it to reach extreme temperatures up to 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The manager later confirmed it was ideal for cremation with absolutely no odor. He could turn his victims into ash without anyone knowing.
And his crimes really ramped up as the fair preparations hit their peak.
Precisely. His first confirmed victim in the building was Julia Connor, Ned Connor's wife. She'd become involved with Holmes, got pregnant, and was seeking what they called a criminal operation back then, an abortion.
And this was scheduled for Christmas Eve, 1892.
It was. The sources detail the use of chloroform. He told her she'd wake up fine, free of her encumbrance. As the anesthetic took hold, her hands began moving in what he later described in his confession as slow arcs, soothing and sensuous, calling it a pastoral exit.
It's just so chillingly detached.
And immediately after her death, she became, in his words, material. He hired a local articulator, a man named Charles Chappell, to prepare her skeleton for medical study.
He paid him how much?
$36.
And then
Holmes sold the finished articulated skeleton to Hahnemann Medical College for $200.
So this wasn't just murder, it was a business.
A profit-making enterprise. He was literally profiting from the dismemberment of his former lover. It's the ultimate depravity.
And then there's the case of Emmeline Sigrand.
Equally haunting. She's a lady of refinement, a stenographer Holmes employed. She disappeared not long after giving him a Christmas gift.
And the police found that forensic clue later, in the vault.
They did. Inside the soundproof vault door, they found the unmistakable imprint of a woman's bare foot pressed into the inner steel. The theory was that she'd been locked inside and died struggling to breathe, leaving that one desperate mark.
All while Holmes maintained this perfect mask of civility.
Completely. He wrote this warm, calculated letter to Emmeline's father, claiming she'd gotten married and moved to England. He even kept the lie going, writing again later to say she'd returned and was disappointed she had no mail. He just reveled in the manipulation, using the city's chaos to hide his atrocities. Hashtag VV, triumph, scandal, and political assassination.
So despite all this tragedy and the hidden horror, Burnham and his team, they actually did it. They delivered the impossible.
They did. The final weeks were just a desperate rush. Frank Millet, the artist, led what they called the whitewash gang, painting furiously over the staff coating, which was already starting to crack and chip in the Chicago weather.
And opening day, May 1st, 1893, was a miracle.
Nothing short of it. 10,000 men, had worked through the night before President Cleveland arrived, washing floors, laying sod, getting rid of every last piece of debris. And when the president touched that gold telegraph key, the power was unleashed.
The fair used 3 times the electricity of the entire city of Chicago.
It did. The outlines of every building lit up. The McMoney's fountain erupted 100 feet in the air. 250,000 people were there. Chicago had done it.
But that triumph, it hit a brick wall almost immediately.
The very next day, attendance just plummeted to 10,000 people. And this collapse coincided exactly with the start of the Wall Street panic.
The national financial crisis.
A devastating one. Stock prices collapsed, banks failed, and the country was thrown into a depression that would last for years. So the fair, built on credit and ambition, was suddenly bleeding money into an economic vacuum.
So they needed a spectacle to draw people back in.
Desperately. And that spectacle was George Washington Gale Ferris's colossal wheel. It was engineered specifically to outdo the Eiffel Tower.
The engineering challenges must have been immense.
Far beyond anything they'd faced on the fairgrounds. They had to deal with frozen earth and quicksand marsh underneath, using dynamite and steam jets just to create a stable foundation.
The scale of it is just hard to grasp.
The axle alone weighed over 142,000 pounds, the largest piece of forged steel in history at the time. And the wheels supported 36 cars, each one weighing 13 tons, carrying over 2,000 people at a time.
People must have been terrified.
A mix of admiration and deep physical anxiety. One source described it as a fragile Brobdingnagian structure.
And it opened late, right?
51 days late. And the sources relay this fascinating, terrifying story from a test ride. A man named Werit, totally calm on the ground, was overwhelmed by a latent terror of heights the moment the car started to move. He just panicked, throwing himself against the iron grate so violently he bent the metal. The scale of the White City was literally pushing people to the brink.
Meanwhile, the Midway Plaisance was offering a very different kind of distraction.
Oh yeah. Saul Bloom, the czar of the Midway, he made sure there was plenty of titillating and exotic entertainment. Belly dancers, camels, hot air balloons. They even had a Midway ball with this satirical menu, offering things like roast missionary a la Dahomey.
But the flaws in the White City were becoming more and more obvious. They were tragic.
They were. In July, the cold storage building fire killed 15 people. The fair's auditor revealed Burnham's department had spent over $22 million, twice the budget. A retrenchment committee was formed to enforce drastic cuts. The beautiful facade was hiding a disastrous balance sheet.
But the ultimate tragedy, that struck right at the heart of Chicago, just before the fair was supposed to close.
The assassination of Mayor Carter Henry Harrison, he was known as the Fair Mayor, had just won his 5th term. He was this charismatic, eccentric figure who famously rode his white mare through the city.
And his popularity fueled a fatal delusion in one of his supporters.
Patrick Prendergast. He'd campaigned for Harrison and believed he was owed the job of corporation counsel.
When he didn't get it.
His delusion turned murderous. On October 28th, he shot Mayor Harrison at his home, and that act instantly transformed the grand closing ceremony they had planned into this vast, spontaneous funeral.
The dream was over.
The dream ended abruptly. The fair officially closed 2 days later. Flags were lowered. Horns played a somber, star-spangled banner. And the Black City just roared back to life.
The closure created a social disaster.
A complete disaster. Thousands of unemployed fair workers were stranded. They joined the masses of homeless men, which contributed directly to the violence of the Pullman strike the next year. And the White City itself was quickly destroyed. Fires, fueled by all that temporary staff and lumber, consumed the majestic buildings. The beautiful dream just burned away. Hashtag The Detective and the Aftermath.
So the White City had offered this brief moment of beauty, but its collapse exposed everyone to the reality of the Black City. In Holmes, he sensed the pressure was on.
He did. Creditors were closing in, the police were getting suspicious, he'd already fled Chicago.
And this is where our sources pick up the chase, in 1895, with Detective Frank Geyer of the Philadelphia Police.
America's Sherlock Holmes, as he came to be known, a big man with a walrus mustache. He was initially tracking Holmes, still known as Mudgett for insurance fraud.
Faking the death of his assistant, Benjamin Peitzel.
Right, except Holmes had actually killed him. So the investigation quickly shifted from fraud to murder, and Geyer's focus narrowed to the 3 missing Peitzel children, Alice, Nellie, and Howard.
And the search became a national obsession.
It did. The public was captivated by this one persistent detective doing this terrible, necessary work. And Geyer's brilliance was his meticulous reliance on clues. He was following Holmes's trail through the summer heat, armed with letters the children had written to their grandparents.
Even though Holmes supervised the letters, they still held clues.
Irrefutable clues. And the way Holmes treated those children was just a psychological horror show. In one of Alice's letters, she wrote she was so homesick, and then critically she noted, "Howard is not with us now."
So Geyer realized Holmes was separating them.
Deliberately, moving them from city to city in this cruel, twisted journey, often just a few blocks from where their mother was, without her knowing. He was torturing them all.
And the search led Geyer to Toronto.
To a rented house. They started digging in the cellar, and Geyer said that as soon as they made a small hole, the gases, the smell of decay burst forth, and the stench was frightful. At 3 feet down, they found the bodies of Alice and Nellie.
The identification process must have been horrific.
Unimaginable. Mrs. Patessel confirmed it through these small, heartbreaking details. Alice's polished teeth, she was always polishing them, and Nellie's long black hair.
And he still had to find the last child, Howard.
He kept going, finally tracking his path back to Indianapolis. It was a painstaking investigation.
And the final identification of Howard, it came from this chillingly poignant clue.
It did. Geyer found a simple Tin Man toy mounted on a spinning top. Mrs. Patessel recognized it instantly. Howard's father, Benjamin, had bought that exact toy for him at the Great Chicago World's Fair.
So the Black City Killer was identified by a token from the White City's dream.
Exactly. And the aftermath brought these strange, varied legacies for everyone. Burnham got the ultimate validation, honorary degrees from Harvard and Yale, the schools that had rejected him. He became a pioneer of modern urban planning.
He achieved his ambition.
He did. He died in 1912, not long after his friend, the painter Frank Millet, the head of the Whitewash Gang, was lost on the Titanic.
And Olmsted.
The fair ravaged him. He suffered from profound insomnia, a constant roaring in his head. But despite his personal decline, the fair launched the City Beautiful movement. The idea that cities didn't have to be dark and filthy.
And what about the opposition, Louis Sullivan?
His career went into a sharp decline. He fired his junior architect, Frank Lloyd Wright, in 1893, and, ironically, Wright, now free from Sullivan's shadow, went on to become the giant who championed truly American architecture. He stayed smug in prison, claimed to feel no humiliation. But the horror of his story persisted, and it was enhanced by all the strange phenomena after his execution. Geyer got seriously ill. The prison warden committed suicide. A fire destroyed the DA's office but left a photo of Holmes completely untouched. The dark legend was secured. Hashtag tag outro.
So what remains when you synthesize all of this is that profound, almost unbelievable contrast. You have the White City, this magnificent, fleeting vision of beauty and order that defined modern urban planning.
Built right on top of the Black City. The reality of Chicago's raw violence, its economic collapse, and the human depravity embodied by Holmes's castle.
The fair definitely achieved its initial goal, right? It erased the idea that Chicago was uncivilized.
It did, but it did so by creating this colossal, perfectly white facade out of staff and lumber materials that were explicitly designed to be temporary, ephemeral, to be swept away. It was a beautiful lie told to mask a very harsh reality.
So if you connect this to the larger picture of American progress, I mean, you have to consider how quickly that magnificent facade just fell to fire and decay. It lasted barely 6 months.
Well, the underlying darkness, the political corruption, the economic hardship, the simple murder and exploitation, that persisted. It resurfaced immediately.
Which forces us to ask, which city, the utopian vision or the brutal reality, had the greater, more enduring impact on the soul of modern American society?